Hello, welcome. Is your child getting positive behavior supports at school? Are you happy with the behavior plan that he has or she has in the IEP? Or would you like some new behavior ideas that you can use at home? Well then, today's the perfect place for you, because today we're going to be discovering 4 different things. First of all, we're going to learn why we need to write a special clause in that evaluation consent form before you sign it for a functional behavior assessment. You'll also discover when and how to ask why. The third thing that you'll discover in today's live show is how time for teacher reflection will make a huge difference. And then the 4th strategy is something new that I didn't know, and it's all about contingency maps. And you're probably going, what? What's a contingency map? Well, stay tuned, because that will be our 4th strategy that you'll be discovering today. So if I haven't got a chance to meet you yet, I'm Charmaine Thaner. I'm a parent, a retired teacher, and an advocate. And my passion is to help parents be more effective advocates so your child gets the education that they deserve, so they can be happy, safe, and learning at school. So that's what each of our shows is about. That's what all my work is about, is to help you become a more effective advocate. So let's start off our show by looking at this statement that sometimes we hear in school meetings, at IEP meetings, is sometimes I've heard teachers say, well, this student is just too disabled or too complex to learn new things. Well, one of the things that you could say as a parent is, if my child has learned to behave inappropriately, my child can learn appropriate behavior. So, don't let your child's complex needs be an excuse for not having positive behavior supports at school. That's super important. The other thing that I want to ground ourselves with today is that we've got to remember that any new behavior we're teaching a child has to be easier for him to do than the problem behavior. Now, most times we've seen kids use inappropriate ways to get their needs met, and they've been really successful because we've reinforced those inappropriate behaviors. But today we're going to be looking at positive behavior supports, how we can build on your child's strengths and interests, how we can make sure that they're safe, happy, and learning at school. So let's look at our first strategy, which is what you need to write on that evaluation consent form before you sign it. Now, so many times what I see is parents are asked to sign consent for a variety of assessments. And since we're talking about behavior today, let's look at what often is really needed is for a functional behavior assessment to be done. Well, so many times all we do is we see the form and it has checked, functional behavior assignment, and we sign the paper. However, you really need to know what kinds of things the staff is going to be doing for that functional behavior assessment. And I want you to have that in writing on that permission form before you sign on the dotted line. So if you typically look at what gets done for functional behavior assessments, usually some staff will observe your child. Hopefully they'll be taking objective data. But maybe the teacher has some kind of a formal interview with the person doing the functional behavior assessment, but usually that's all. And guess what's missing? Do you know what's missing? It's a parent interview. you have to be seen as that equal team member. And you have such rich knowledge and information. Everybody tells you you're the best expert on your child. Well, when you are signing permission for a functional behavior assessment, make sure you write on the form, or the staff writes on the form, that a parent interview is going to be part of that functional behavior assessment. So I see we've got some live viewers with us right now. So if you have questions, make sure you type them in. If you have comments, go ahead and include your comments, and we'll make sure that we get back to all your questions as we're going through the show today. So the first strategy, make sure that you have parent interview written on that consent form for a functional behavior assessment. Now, the reason why this even kind of like popped into my head, how you have those aha moments. Well, I was at a 2-day conference this past week, Monday and Tuesday, put on by the University of Idaho, and they had a wonderful speaker from British Columbia in Canada, Dr. Brenda Fawcett, and she was talking in detail about this wonderful tool, the parent interview. And it just made so much sense to me, because so many times, like I've said before, parents have that kind of intimate knowledge of those nuances of your child. You know when he's about to have a meltdown. You know when he, is hungry, and you better hurry up and get some food out there. Those kinds of things that you know about your child, the more that you share that information with the staff, and the more that they implement your knowledge and your ideas and your tips that you're giving them, your child's going to be happier and safer at school. And that's what we want. So let's go on to our second strategy, which is when and how to ask why. Now, this might sound kind of confusing, but what we want is we want people to dive deeper. What I see so many times is that we just kind of look at things from the surface. And most often for behavior assessments, what the psychologist or the special ed teacher will tell you is, well, we think your child is acting this way because, one, they want to avoid something, like avoid schoolwork or avoid doing their chores at home. Or they'll say, your child is really trying to gain something, and it might be gain the teacher's attention or gain the parent's attention. Or maybe it's to gain a tangible reward, like more iPad time, right? How many of us have kids that would love to have more iPad or electronic time? So usually that's kind of where they stop. They say, well, your child wants to avoid something or your child wants to get something. But what I want all of us to try to figure out is, why are they wanting to avoid that math assignment? So sometimes I think we don't totally understand that, sometimes kids are given something that makes it too easy for them. And often we'll see some inappropriate behavior because it's like, this has been asked of me 1,000,000 times and it's way too easy. Now, this example we have on the slide is a student working at a computer and doing just some simple geometry exercises. Well, the teacher thought, well, he loves working on the computer, so we'll do this. But guess what? That geometry task on the computer was way too easy for the student. So instead of him sitting there and learning more geometry, he would usually have some kind of inappropriate behavior, and it would cause this big ruckus in the classroom. So instead, what the teacher did is she shifted, and she actually figured out that he'd rather work alone at his desk with paper, pencil, and do some more challenging math tasks. So just by having somebody tell you, oh, your child's avoiding doing his work, isn't good enough. We need to ask why. Why is he avoiding the math work? In the example we just showed, it was because the math was too easy. I've worked with other families where year after year, for many years, in their child's IEP, it has goals like we'll identify colors, we'll identify shapes, we'll identify letters. And this is a middle school student that's been doing this for years. And guess what? He is tired of you asking him these same questions. And what I hear sometimes from teachers is, well, he hasn't consistently showed us that he can do these skills, so we have to keep this on as an IEP goal. And my response as an advocate is, I appreciate you wanting to make sure that the child has mastered a skill. However, let's move on. I think it's time for us to either say, this is good enough, and we're going to go on to some new skills, because what we're seeing from the behavior is he's protesting. He's telling you, stop asking me these questions that people have asked me for years. So always look at the why. Go underneath. If they say your child is trying to gain attention, and that's what they develop the behavior plan on, well, again, gaining attention is not enough for me to really understand that function of the behavior. So as a parent, when you're in IEP meetings, ask why. Why do we think he's trying to gain the attention? Is it because he doesn't feel like he really belongs in the classroom? Does he feel like he never gets a chance to kind of shine, that he's always, getting in trouble for things, versus having people notice those moments when he's doing excellent work, and are we giving him enough praise? So the second strategy is to always look at the why. And let me just do a quick check on my phone, because I see that we do have, let me turn it down, some questions. So, Yael says, absolutely need the parents to be a part of that. And that, I think, goes along with making sure you do that interview with the parents. So, Lee and Tatina, we have on here also. And I don't think I pronounced your name right, so I apologize. But I'm glad we've got some live viewers with us. And keep posting your comments and questions, because we'll be responding to those during the show. So thanks for being here. Now, another thing that we commonly see is that change of routine is really hard for kids. And when we have that change in routine, sometimes we see that inappropriate behavior. Well, often we have a visual schedule, but a tactile schedule can be really helpful for students who need that predictable schedule during the day. So the thing about tactile schedules is that they were usually used for students who are blind or have visual impairments. So students who couldn't look at a typical visual schedule because of their sight, we developed these tactile schedules. Well, what I've seen is some kids, even if they're sighted, would prefer a tactile schedule, which has, like on this example, it has a spoon for when it's lunchtime. So there's an actual object glued or Velcroed to the foam board or whatever you're using. And that predictable tactile schedule can make a big difference for a student. So part of what I'd like us to do is think outside that visual schedule box, because sometimes what we're using really isn't what's motivating for the child to use. Now, the other tip I have for you is usually on visual schedules, we might have a time clock or a time and what the activity is. But for a lot of kids, they need to know, how long do I have to do this? The other thing they need to know is, with whom am I going to do this with? And where am I going to be working? Now this spring I was working with a student who was blind, and the teacher came up with this wonderful tactile schedule. And the other neat thing that she did is he worked with a variety of teachers and paras during the day. So for him to know who he was going to be working with, what she did is she had different swatches of pieces of fabric. So the furry fabric represented one parent or para, the piece of, like it was kind of like a, what do you call it, like man-made leather that was like a smoother piece. She had a strip of that, and that was for when the OT would come in. So the idea is whether or not your child is blind or visually impaired, you need to have a way to also help them understand who they're going to be working with on that schedule. So whether it's a typical visual schedule with pictures, whether it's a tactile schedule, not only put down the activity, but give them an idea of how long they're going to do it, who they're going to do it with, and maybe even the setting, if it's going to be in the OT room, if it's going to be in the classroom, if it's going to be in the special ed room. All those kinds of details can help students out. Now, the other thing about tactile schedules, like I said, it doesn't have to be just for kids who have visual impairments. But this is an example of a tactile schedule that a mom used at home with her child. So she had actual objects laid out in the order of their routine and what was going to happen for their bedtime routine. Often we see in behavior plans that they'll have a visual schedule listed or in accommodations, and we don't think sometimes as a parent, wow, a schedule at home would be helpful too. So think about visual schedules, think about tactile schedules as something that maybe you could include in your home routine that will make things go more smoothly this summer. The other thing that we always want to be asking why about is, and trying to figure out more, is about our triggers. And I'm going to stop just for a moment because we've got a couple other comments. We have a mom who says, or Lee says, what a great idea for a schedule. If the items are removable, they could be used as a transition object to move from one activity to another. Yes, Lee, that's a great idea, because sometimes it helps kids to be able to take one object that they just finished and either remove that and get the other object and know, okay, so this is, a picture, or this is a small object of a xylophone, and I'm going to take this to music class. And when I get to music class, I'm going to hand it to the music teacher, and that helps that child transition to a new class or a new activity. So thanks, Lee, for that comment, because that's what I like about the live show is we get lots of other good ideas from other parents, and the more we share our ideas online, the more we help each other. So thanks so much for commenting. The other thing that we're going to look at is triggers, because Lisa says, are triggers and antecedents the same thing? And yes, Lisa, they are. A trigger is something that happens right before the behavior. So sometimes they're called antecedents, and sometimes they're called triggers. If your teacher is using an ABC data form, the A stands for antecedent. Sometimes the teacher will use triggers, but it means the same thing. So a trigger happens, something happens, and then right then a behavior happens. So that's the trigger or the antecedent that we're looking at. A lot of times we look at what the triggers are for problem behavior, but we don't look at what the triggers are for appropriate behavior. So I want to find out not only, what I need to try to avoid or prevent if I know a trigger is a student, having an, unexpected change in their schedule. If that's a trigger and I know the child is probably going to have a meltdown, then I'm going to try and prevent that by having a schedule, by letting them know ahead of time, things like that. But I also want to figure out what triggers or what the antecedents are for appropriate behavior. So if I know, if I give a child a choice and he gets to pick which, assignment or which, activity he does first, and he just is really pleasant, he sits down and gets started right away, then it's like, that's a trigger for appropriate behavior. If I give more choices, he does much better. So again, we want to know not only triggers for inappropriate behaviors, but triggers for appropriate behaviors. And that reminds me of what our advocacy tool is for today. It's a light bulb. Because sometimes we have those light bulb moments that happen and it's like, why didn't I think of that before? So always be on the lookout for little things that you haven't noticed before, but it's going to be like, yes, this works. And if you're a parent and you have those light bulb moments, make sure you share that information with teachers. We don't want teachers having to reinvent the wheel and figure out all of this, by themselves, week after week of trial and error. Share what you know with teachers. So hopefully that will also be implemented in writing in the behavior plan. So I think a lot of times what happens is we have great discussions with teachers at, just informal times that we see them in the hallway or when we're picking our kids up after school. But that conversation doesn't usually get written in the IEP. If you guys come up with some new ideas, just ask the teacher for a quick meeting to amend the IEP and write in these new accommodations or write in these new strategies, either in the, part of the IEP that has accommodations, or if your child has a behavior plan, make sure these good ideas are in writing, or it really doesn't help because there's no accountability for it. So those are our first couple strategies. We want to make sure that there's a parent interview in that FBA process, in the functional behavior assessment process, and we want to make sure we go deeper. We ask why the child is doing this or why that trigger is happening and what we could do to prevent it. Now, the other thing that I always think is super important that sometimes we forget is to celebrate what works. Yes, we want to get to that point because once we know what works, then we can try and replicate it. We can try and, enforce that or reinforce that in other settings. So we don't want to concentrate so much on what is always going wrong, but we want to look at the times during the day, either the times during the school day or the times at home where things are going really smoothly. And we want to take a moment to think about that and think, wow, I noticed today when I gave him a choice of juice, when I gave him a choice of what cup he wanted, when I gave him a choice of where he wanted to sit to drink the juice, things went better. Therefore, it might be choices. I might have to be thinking of more choices to give my child, and then things go better. So use what you found has been really helpful, and then in another situation, make sure you use that strategy again, because that's going to help the day go much smoother for everybody. So I'm going to pause before we get to our third strategy and see if we have any more questions or comments. So Erica joined us. So hey, Erica, if you're finding these strategies helpful, click on that share button that you see and share this to your personal page, share it to groups that you're in. The whole idea is the more parents that know these positive strategies to help teachers use with their children at school, the more parents that know about positive strategies they can use at home, It's going to help everybody. So share this live video. If it's something that's been helpful, give us a like or some love there. And we will continue here with our third strategy. Now this also is one of my, I guess kind of a pet peeve, is that a lot of times there doesn't seem to be a priority for staff to take a few minutes and to reflect on what's going on. So time for teacher reflection is huge. Now, what I see sometimes is teachers are starting to take more data, more objective data on behavior and, progress and IEP goals, and that's great. But guess what? If they don't look at the data, if they don't try to see if there's a pattern going on or if it's time to change their strategy because it's not working anymore, if teachers and parents don't sit down and really take the time to reflect how things are going, guess what? Things will usually fall apart. Now, for instance, I was working with a family this year, and one of the things that I noticed is that I looked at all of the communication that was being sent home and the incident reports that were being sent home, and I noticed this pattern that the first thing, if the student would do something like push his chair away from the desk and not want to do his work in the first grade classroom, what the para was doing was then going up to him and saying, "Oh, do you want to take a sensory break? Let's go down to the special ed room and we'll take a sensory break." Well, guess what? That was not being very helpful. All that did was reinforce, all I have to do is push my chair away from my desk, and the para's going to come over here. I'm going to get out of going to class, doing my work in class, and I get to go down to the special ed room and play with some silly putty. Well, when that happens day after day after day, somebody needs to be noticing that, and somebody needs to be saying, look what we've done here. It's probably, not, done with any intention, but this is what the unintended consequence is. So instead, if we can look at, how many other first graders sometimes when they're given a math worksheet are like, they don't want to do it. But the first grade teacher doesn't tell that student, "Okay, I'm sorry, you don't want to do your math, you'll have to go down to another room." No, I was a first grade teacher. There's a lot of first graders that don't necessarily want to get started on their work right when you put it on their desk. So instead, if we could teach that parent, what other strategies could you use if the child pushes his chair away from the desk? What can we do to prevent it? Do we need to make sure that we have some of those sensory things like the silly putty in the first grade classroom, that the student could just quietly use at its desk and not have to leave and go down the hall and go to the special ed room? So we need time to reflect. Teachers need that time. Parents also need that time, to reflect on what's working and what's not working. The other thing that I've noticed is that unless we have almost a box on a page for teachers to fill out, often they don't do it. So we have these great forms, and this is an example of an ABC chart where the teacher's writing down what the antecedent was or the trigger, they're writing down what the student's behavior was, and then what the consequence was for that. And they'll keep this ABC data going, and they'll do it throughout the day, every day. But what I would like to see on the form is another box added there so the teacher writes down comments of, did I notice any patterns? Is it time for me to change my strategy? Did we really use the prevention strategies that are written in his behavior plan? So, whether this is a checklist on the form or a box for the teacher to write a narrative comment, I really think we need to switch up some of the forms that we use for recording behavior data and not just have it for recording what the student's behavior was, but also recording what the staff has been doing and if we need to make any switches or tweaks with how the staff is reacting. So give me a thumbs up if you think that would be a cool idea for teachers to be accountable and to be thinking about what they need to be doing also. So I see that Leona has joined us. So hey Leona, she's an awesome mom who I've worked with and I just got to have lunch with about a week ago. And Leona has, done an awesome job with her son, and he's doing so well now in high school. I started doing some work with the family when he was in middle school, and we've made some just great creative changes in his life. And one, it's because of the support of the parents, and two, because he has a different teacher here in the high school, and that teacher seems to be having so much more rapport built with her son that it's just making a huge difference. So far we've talked about 3 strategies, and if you've missed some of this, you can go back and watch the replay that will be up on Facebook. But the first strategy that we talked about was to make sure that they include a parent interview and the functional behavior assessment. And the way to do that is to have it in writing on that consent form that they're going to include doing a parent interview for that FBA. The second strategy was to dig deeper, to ask why. Why is the student trying to get more attention? Why is the student trying to avoid the work? We don't want to just stop at, he's attention seeking or he's avoiding work. Go underneath and get to the whys. The third strategy we just went over was time for teacher reflection. Time for teachers to look, are there patterns in the behavior? Are there things that we can do differently? Now, our fourth strategy is something totally new. I hadn't ever seen this before, and it's called contingency mapping. So give me a yes or a no if you've ever heard of contingency mapping before. So type in the comments yes or no. Have you heard of contingency mapping? Now, this to me was one of those kind of light bulb moments for me when I was at that recent workshop this past week that the University of Idaho sponsored. And this was that we can actually be showing students what happens when they choose appropriate behavior and what happens when they choose inappropriate behavior. And the idea, again, is to make it more visual. So instead of just, wow, 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 talking at kids all the time and they're like, yikes, I don't even want to hear you anymore. Instead, we use this thing called a contingency map. So here's an example of it. So hopefully you can, it's like large enough where you can see it on the screen. But it shows you the green boxes are what happens if the student makes appropriate choices. So in the first box on the left, it says, I'm working with the teacher. And there's just a drawing of a student sitting at his desk. And then if you go up to the top, it says, I can raise my hand. So if the student has a question, an appropriate thing is to raise his hand. And then, if he needs a break, the next box shows asking for a break. Then the third box at the top shows he gets to take a break and sit on the beanbag chair. So if we look at this map, the appropriate route to go is following those green boxes. Raise your hand when you need a break, ask for a break, and then I get to go sit in the beanbag chair. Now, the inappropriate route on the map that we hope students aren't taking is he's sitting there doing his work, and then if you look at the bottom red box, it says, I run away. After I run away, guess what happens? I don't ask for a break, and I don't get to sit in the beanbag chair. So I just think this is so cool. And, it's like one of those things that, somebody somewhere thought of. And it's like, I just think there's like so many uses for it. So if you think this contingency map would be cool to use with your child, just type in a map. And so Linnea is also on, Linnea, and thanks for being here. And you might want to go back and look at the beginning or the replay of this, Linnea, because I do give some examples of tactile schedules and also how those could be used at home. So I know her son has used some tactile schedules at school, so that would be fun for you to see that beginning part of our video. So here is another example of a contingency map. And yeah, Elle, who's a advocate in Colorado, said yes, she's heard about contingency mapping, but just under a different name. And we also have Julie who joined us. So hey, Julie. Julie's got twin boys that are just darling, and I know they keep her busy. So Julie, welcome. And if you need to, when this video is done, you can go back and see the replay and see the other examples we've been giving for behavior ideas. So here's another contingency map. So if you look on the far left, there's a picture of a book and it says, I choose a book. Now the route that we want kids to take is where that green arrow leads. So if you look at the top, it says, I sit and read, and I do that for 5 minutes, and then I get to play a game. So that's the appropriate route on the map that we want our kids to take. We want them to know that once they read for 5 minutes, the reinforcement will be a game that they can play. However, what we see sometimes might be the child taking the inappropriate route on the map where the red arrow is, and it's a picture of a child not sitting down, throwing the book, and guess what? That means no iPad. So again, these visual kinds of steps can be really helpful. I know sometimes teachers use social stories, which is, really similar to using a contingency map. Sometimes social stories just have a little bit too much information, either too much, too many sentences, not enough pictures. So an alternative to a social story would be to use a contingency map. And I do have an example of just the blank template. So if you would like me to send you this template or the examples of the contingency map, just say send me in the comments, and I'll make sure that I get you the examples of the contingency map and also this template so you can design your own. And Julie says, hey Charmaine, glad I caught you. Yay, so her twins must be maybe down for a nap, because I know Julie also has another little guy at home, so with 3 little ones at home, she's a pretty busy mom. But if you would like the contingency map, just say send me, and I'll make sure that I get this out to you. So this other idea is just kind of a random idea, but I don't know. It's like sometimes it's like, how come we can't think of these things ourselves? So this is an idea I got from the workshop that I went to, and she was talking about a child who just really, craves and really needs his mom's attention. And I know I have some grandkids that are like that with my daughter. So if you think about it, sometimes getting kids up in the morning to get ready for school or get ready for their routine is like a struggle. And then it just sets everybody else in the household off for some bad morning routines, right? So if you have a child that needs a lot of attention, and just think about it, they've been sleeping hopefully well for 6-8 hours, and they haven't received any of your attention. And then in the morning, when it's time to get up, we're like, okay, time to get up, sweetie. Maybe turn the light on, and they start grumbling, and it just becomes this kind of power struggle to get them out of the bed. Well, this idea that I heard about when I was at the workshop was so cool. So what the mom did instead for the morning routine is she would go into her child's bedroom, she would turn on some soft music, she would not turn the light on yet, and instead she'd pull up a chair next to her child's bed and just rub his back for a while and just talk to him quietly, softly for a few minutes. And that made like this huge difference in how they started their day. So instead of the child waking up crabby and not wanting to do things, this mom figured out, he is somebody that just craves my attention. How can I give that to him in the morning so the day goes better for everybody? So I don't know, it sounds like this simple idea, but it's like, wow. There are smart moms out there that figure these things out. And so this is what I hope that you'll do. When you figure things out, share it on your Facebook page. Share it when you're out with moms for the Mom's Night Out. Share it with moms when you're sitting down, at the coffee shop. We want to make sure that we're spreading these ideas. We're not keeping it to ourselves, because the more we know, the better we do, right? So let's do a quick check here and see if we have any other questions. So when I was saying, well, maybe Julie's twins are taking a nap, she said, no, they're crawling around my feet waiting for their lunch. So yes, that's maybe one of those triggers. When they start doing that, then they're probably hungry and it's lunchtime, right? So So Lisa's saying hi to Jody. Jody, and I'm so excited that we have so many people with us live today, because, like I said, the more we know, the more that we can do for our kids. One of the things that I wanted to leave you with is a thought that students, teachers, and parents do the best they can do with what they have. So remember, your child is doing the best they can do with what they have. So is your child's teacher, and so are you as a parent. My hope is, as an advocate, that I can help you learn to be an even more effective advocate for your child, so they can get the education they deserve, so they can be safe, happy, and learning with their friends at school. So until we see you again, I'm Charmaine Thaner, and we always have our shows Thursdays at noon Mountain Time. Next Thursday, I'm going to be traveling someplace in Utah on my way to Colorado for a vacation. So next Thursday, I will just have to see how my internet is and how my cell phone reception is, but hopefully we'll also be doing a show next Thursday at noon while I'm on the road. So until next week, take care, and we shall see you then.